There's always at the core, I feel, of any censorship movement, of a loving group of adults who care about their kids. And I love those parents. I respect and honor them because I understand how hard it is. But what has made me incandescently angry as an American, as a writer, is that those normal fears of people raising children are being manipulated by dark forces. We got the Death Eaters are in the house, and they are taking the normal fears of trying to raise kids and manipulating it for their own financial and political ends. My name is Laurie Halse Anderson. I write books for kids and for teenagers. I've been doing so for about 25 years, and I've been dealing with censorship for just as long. When people are trying to ban my books, it's because they feel I'm talking about sex in a way that's inappropriate for children. And they qualify children as being under age 18. You know what's really inappropriate? What's really inappropriate are adults who are unwilling to talk to kids about the realities of the world. 1 out of every 3 people who identify as female in the United States have been victims of some form of sexual violence. 1 out of 6 people who identify as male in the United States have been victims of some forms of sexual violence. And our community members who identify outside of those traditional binaries, they have much higher rates of sexual violence as well. We've never had a generation of adults in the United States who were comfortable with talking about healthy, consent-based sexuality. They think they're shielding their children. What they're actually doing is they're making their children more vulnerable, and they're making all the kids in their community more vulnerable, despite the wishes of other families. I started writing Speak back in 1996, back when my oldest child was almost 13. When I was 13, that's when I was raped, and I didn't tell anybody what had happened to me for over 20 years. When I was attacked, just at the beginning of 9th grade, I hid in the library. I forgot to go to class. I got high a lot. I did all the kinds of things that people who are trying to struggle through a traumatic experience do. Reading, even though there weren't any books about my experience, but the act of reading, the act of going into that safe sanctuary in the library, that's what kept me alive through those years. Trauma from sexual assault or abuse can last a lifetime, can have generational impacts. People who are victims of sexual violence tend to have lower educational accomplishments. Their lifetime earnings fall. They often fall into depression and deal with mental illness for the rest of their lives. I certainly am. The other really interesting thing that makes this current extremist attack on literature shocking is that they say that Speak should not be in high schools because it might make boys feel bad. I visited well over 1 million high school students in the last couple of decades. And in my experience, when you are honest with all kids, all teens, about the realities of sexual violence and the moral code, the laws, but also like, how do we interact as human beings? And when you explain these things, when I was explaining these things, especially to the boys in these classrooms, an amazing, beautiful thing happened. Because first of all, they were kind of shocked. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. And then you could see them shift gears in their souls. And instead of being a young man saying something that might sound very ignorant, but is not ignorant if no one's told you different, then they would shift into that protective mode, like, oh, I'm not going to let this happen on my watch. I'm going to make sure that I tell my friends about this. Anybody can be a victim of sexual violence, and that's not going to happen because I'm going to do what I can to stop it. And to watch somebody go from not understanding a problem to acknowledging that, learning about the problem, and then figuring out how they can be a solution to the problem. That's why it is so critical that they have access to books, all the books that allow them to work through what the real world is. When we have them in our institutions, when we have them in our schools and our libraries, and we can make sure that they are surrounded by a variety of people with knowledge, and they can read When you read, you develop empathy. When you read, you develop your soul. When you read a book, you connect with the page, you connect with yourself. And if you share a book, you connect with another person.